So, for tonight, I was given kind of an odd thing to go over. And when I was like praying about it and thinking about it and praying about it and then praying about it some more, it became this thing of just like back and forth. And, you know, we are in the midst of a series talking about like effectively about emotional sickness in the soul, as it were. And one of the things that oftentimes doesn't really get cited as being that, we spend a lot of time talking about like anxiety disorders, depression, trauma, different things like that. But oftentimes and these have become things that people become very much aware of in the last, few decades. But what we don't focus on a lot is the other side of it, where we find ourselves looking at things like delusional disorders, where we're talking about delusions of grandeur. The idea of ourselves as being more than we are, when our ability to perceive ourselves goes far and above beyond what is actually right. Like, we spend a lot of time kind of like involving ourselves with issues of like of people who don't really see themselves for who they are, but it's oftentimes coming from the negative context.
Yeah.
It's just as capable of a person to not see themselves for who they are coming from the other side as well, where you think you're just the most amazing thing to walk the earth. Like where confidence transitions into the realm of arrogance, where humility transitions into the realm of haughtiness and pride. So you kind of find yourself in this frustrating circumstance of you again are not seeing yourself for who you are. Instead, you're again seeing yourself through these like rose-tinted lenses. And oftentimes it comes with a heightened idealized version of self. And this is where you get a lot of things like narcissism. Like, a lot of people have narcissistic viewpoints. They see themselves as being so grandiose, so great, so spectacular. But that will probably be a subject for another talk, all its own. This is more, the thing that I was given to look at was more commonplace, something that we all fall into. Because we all have the tendency to fall into realms of thinking better of ourselves than we really are capable of being. A major focus being the Dunning-Kruger Effect, which is effectively the mindset of, it's the term that we apply when we have people who are lacking in competence, who presume themselves to be incredibly full of competence. Basically, it's what you get when you have people who are egregiously ignorant and have maybe like read some headlines about a subject and then presume that they know the details on that. They're experts now. So as a result, they carry on this idea of themselves as being experts. They'll talk to everybody about it, tell everybody that they know everything about it, the ins and the outs and all those different things, and present this idea that they know, and they'll fight people about it. It's why you can have, like, I remember one of my favorite things was an example of this was there was a video on YouTube that I watched from a science-focused organization. And one guy on there, they were looking at climate change, and they were looking at changes that were happening in Antarctica. And this one guy piped up and was like, why didn't they talk about the geothermal changes? Well, at that point, all these people off the internet like proceeded to jump down this guy's throat and call him a climate denier and all these different things like that. And the guy was like, I'm one of the researchers from the expedition that they're talking about. My name is this. Check the paper. At which point, a lot of those posts kind of dissipated. But it was just this thing of like, but what's funny about it was that still didn't stop some people from trying to correct this guy. Mm-hmm. There were still people who were ready to fight him about climate change when all he was saying was there's more going on than what they put out here. Mm-hmm. So you have all these people who kind of go around proclaiming to know exactly what they're talking about and have all the knowledge, and they're willing to fight with an expert in their field about a subject that they don't actually know as much about. And this is kind of it's a prevalent thing. Like, I don't think the Dunning-Kruger effect has been quite as manifest in the past as it is now. Like, there have always been people, a kind of like character type of a person who comes across as like the quintessential know-it-all. They talk down to people about things, they try to make up things to kind of pridefully carry on the idea that they know what they're talking about when when they don't, and anybody can see that they don't, but they still push it. Now it's much more common. Like, nowadays, all you have to do is like open up Facebook and you'll be faced with friends and family and news articles and all kinds of different people presenting forward the idea that they're experts in in something that they just read about once. So the thing about Dunning-Kruger, and the reason why that's specifically what we're looking at today, is because it's probably one of the, given the things that we've talked about so far, it's one of the easiest to fall into. Anybody can do it. You don't have to have like gone through graphic trauma to fall into this. You don't have to have been hurt or abused or anything like that to become this kind of person. All you need is isolation. All you need is a small enough world, and you will find yourself very easily drifting into becoming to this kind of mindset, to the kinds of mindsets associated with Dunning-Kruger. And as a result, you can very much find yourself in the realm of, becoming that story, becoming that example. It's oftentimes noted that like teenagers have a lot of hubris. They have this kind of perspective of I can do anything. Well, this is part of the reason for why. See, when you break down the way that the Dunning-Kruger effect works, the first thing is to kind of talk about like the effects. So, we've already mentioned how a lot of people who lack understanding of a subject or are, in a word, ignorant, they will perpetuate the idea of themselves as not being. They'll present themselves as knowing and understanding this completely. Mm-hmm. At the same time, that's where you get a lot of your people who are completely incompetent at their tasks, having the most confidence in the world in their ability to do it. In all cases, it's kind of a sort of innate arrogance that comes from the idea of I could do this, or I should, or I know this. I did this much to know this about the subject. And these are kind of the two major manifestations, and that's even what brought on the research about it. They wanted to kind of figure out what the story was behind the way that people will, you'll always have that uncle at Thanksgiving who proceeds to like talk very loudly about some obscure subject that he obviously has no idea what he's talking about, but he'll fight anybody under the table as hard as he can because he saw a special on the Discovery Channel, and he's right. So, or his buddy told him this story, or, you know, whatever. So that's where the whole thing came from. Those are kind of like the ways that it manifests. Now, in the research on it, what ultimately was illustrated was, you know, they did a lot of different tests to kind of understand like how this works, what this looks like. And it's not abnormal stuff. It's just kind of an illustration of like the typical folly that people have of overestimating their knowledge and abilities. They did tests on intelligence with things that, you know, that required some level of expertise, and they compared the results with actual experts in these fields. And they found that the people who knew less, understood less, were much more prone to believe that their results were going to come through better than the people who were experts. The funny thing is that, like, you know, on the flip side of this is like a side, a lot of people who have expertise tend to think that other people have a comparable knowledge to them on their subjects, which is probably like a whole other thing, but, you know, it is what it is. But the thing with the Dunning-Kruger people was how hard it was for them to see past this. How hard it was for them to have any humility relating to what their results could be. They were very adamant about the idea that, no, I did great, fantastic. I just knocked all this stuff out of the park, like, because I'm just that good. And that's what they presented forward. And as a result, like, when the researchers gave them their results, they're just like, what? No. And and as they studied it more and more, you know, it's always been a point that people have looked at people like that, who have that kind of mentality, as just being stupid. And what the researchers found was that it actually has nothing to do with intelligence. It has everything to do with, as I said, isolation, or rather, insularity. See, the problem with that they found as they like looked into it was that a lot of these people didn't have people to challenge them. They didn't have people to kind of argue the point. The way that it tended to come about was that it was a lot of people who were by themselves a lot, or separated from people, or had no prior experience. And what it came down to is that with a lot of them, it was like, when it came down to the incompetence relating to like work stuff, they had no gauge. They had no experience to say, oh, I know that I'm not good at this. All they had was, I think that I can do this, therefore I can do it, therefore I'm going to do great at it. It's kind of the same thing as like when a lot of people look at like waiting tables as like an entry-level position. Anybody can do that job until they get there and actually do the job, at which point they find, no, not anybody can wait tables.
It's hard, yeah.
It's a harder job than it looks. It requires a lot more skill than it looks. Even something like dishwashing. A lot of people look down at like dishwashers as being like the lowliest on the totem pole of the restaurant. But keeping up with business that night, like that requires a lot of skill and a lot of time management. And a lot of people, not everybody has that. So, it becomes this sort of thing where like a lot of those people just, they have judgments, but they don't have experience. They have ideas, but they don't have wisdom. And the same is true with the issue of people perpetuating ignorance. In those cases, it was very much a similar incident of they didn't know any better. All that they had to go off of was the little bit of information that they had gathered. And that was it. They didn't push further. They didn't look further. They got a hold of what they thought was enough. And now believing that they had a grasp, they pressed forward in order to perpetuate their truth, as it were, on this matter. So in this state, and they didn't have anybody challenging their opinions, their thoughts, the information that they brought forward as being true. Instead, they just had what they had read. Now, the thing about this is that this problem, like we all see those people, like we all have the capacity to recognize those people who are like that routinely, especially. I mean, there is like a poster child for this subject that comes to mind very quickly. But you know, it becomes this thing of, then we also have the tendency for us to like judge those people very quickly and very harshly, all the while we're all more than capable of slipping into this. All of us. Like, I remember when I was reading about it, because I did take and read a couple of articles on the subject, and I was just like, man, I have done that a number of times. Like, I know that I've done it. I can remember distinct occasions where I studied something, found a piece of information, and then came around to find later that I was very wrong or very misunderstanding of the facts, but I had ran around and told people as though it was true. I mean, I literally just did it with the vulture bee thing, and I was so mad. Like, my stepbrother, or my brother-in-law sent me that news article. Like, it was a full-on like article out of like a little newspaper talking about vulture bees and the corpse honey and all this crazy stuff, and it was like, how have I ever heard of this? So I'm running around talking to people about it. I'm excited. I'm going to do an animal post on it. Sit down and do the research.
Felt like you knew it.
Felt like I knew, like I had this crazy, cool story to tell, and it was going to be epic. I sit down and do the research and find that, oh, that newspaper article, or that article was based off of memes, and those memes were based off of misinformation. I hate memes. The thing is that then I had to go around and be like, oh, actually, after, spending 4 hours researching vulture bees on the internet and finding the egregious disparity between available information that actually is scholarly from the subject versus available information that is from damn memes and Reddit posts that is just literally like all of which functionally breaks down to water cooler talk. That's all you get. Like, it's all it is. So you have people walking away, thinking all these weird things. Well, they make honey out of dead bodies. No, they don't. They don't do that. They actually just make honey out of nectar, which they just don't get the nectar from flowers. They get it from fruit. And I'm still bitter. I'm still bitter and embarrassed that I spent a week running around telling people about this such a cool animal, only to find out that it was a lie. It was all misinformation.
But the animal's real?
The animal is real. Vulture bees are real. There are 3 different species of vulture bee. The thing is like I said, it's really easy to fall into this, and I can think of myself as this example. And granted, this was unintentional, but that's kind of the point, okay? Yeah. Nobody who illustrates the Dunning-Kruger Effect sits down and says, you know what? I'm gonna make up information about myself and about life, and I'm going to spread it around because I want it to be true. That is a whole other subject. The thing about it is that the Dunning-Kruger Effect is something that's very much so accidental. It's incidental. It's created by circumstance. But it's circumstance that we're completely able to circumvent, completely able to come against, if we choose to. And this is where we find a problem. This is where this becomes a topic worthy of a Bible message. Because a lot of people are not willing to. Mm-hmm. In our current climate, in our current day and age, Dunning-Kruger effect, I would argue, is probably more prevalent than it ever has been. Because with the internet and the advent of Google and different things like that, everybody has all the information in the world at their fingertips. So we think. The problem with this is that all that information is not actually what people look up. Usually they just go based off of what they hear off of Facebook, or what they hear from Reddit, or Imgur, or whatever. Whatever your news source of choice is, that is where you will draw your information. Now, the thing about it is that I have seen so many people post up true facts that were derived from satire websites, where the entire point of the website was just to make up a satirical version of the news, but no one knew the difference. People read these articles and thought, oh my gosh, this is such a crazy fact. And they went around and shared it, and it was like, dude, you know that source you're pulling from is like a joke, right? Like they literally, and we're not talking about like The Onion or anybody obvious. We're talking about like more obscure things. And as a part of their joke, they put out their information. Just recently, Billie Eilish ended up...
Just for people like we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
They think it's funny to watch.
Yeah, just to watch these people get all wound up and so on. Just recently, Billie Eilish was in the news because a website, I think it was like a website dedicated to her Twitter or something like that, or it was a Twitter site, I can't quite remember. But they got her in trouble because they were posting things that they claimed were from, when she was younger. They were tweets from when she was younger. And they were saying things like, oh, I wish I could stay poor because I just want to be relatable,
I heard about this.
And in reality, as it turned out, like, these were all fake tweets. Every bit of it was fake.
Yeah.
And the reason it was from the website that they were all coming from was a satire site. Mm-hmm. Billie Eilish's brother and boyfriend had to each come out and be like, guys, this isn't true. But all these people on Twitter were just riled up like crazy, wanting to like burn down Billie Eilish's house for these things. And it's just like, it's the thing, like, it's so easy to get caught up in misinformation. Literally, a quote from Dunning, the doctor involved in the study of Dunning-Kruger Effect, is, "We are all engines of misbelief." In basic psychology, one of the first things that you learn is one of the big three things that you have to learn immediately when figuring out where people are at is delusion. Like, whenever you do like talk therapy or any form of therapy relating to just trying to help people through things, you run into a lot of issues with memory, perception, and delusion. These are the big three that you have to learn to navigate, because memory can be adjusted, memory can change, memory can do all kinds of things. Memory is not infallible. Perception. The individual's perception can vary dramatically. There are a lot of people who are very observational. There are a lot of people who are very much so feelers. There are a lot of people who draw their information in different ways, so their perception can be very, very different. You know, you can have some person walk up and say hi, and the three different people standing in front of that person are going to draw very, very different first impressions from that person. One of them might feel an air of disingenuousness coming from that individual and immediately dislike them. Another person might observe that they seem like an upstanding guy, so they're going to appreciate this person. And the other one might think that the person is just completely boring and mundane and have no interest in this person. So just in this one case study, you've got one person who dislikes this person's walked up and said hi, and is met with disapproval, approval, and
Boredom.
boredom, sure. Ambivalence is what I was going to say. I just don't care. And this is where this is where perception comes in. But delusion is one of those big three, because delusions matter, and they can affect those other things. Your memory can be affected by the delusions that you carry around about yourself, about people. Talking last week about depression. Depression is, for all intents and purposes, a delusion. It is something that manifests itself in your mind and creates a false perception. So if you are carrying around that false perception, then you can easily find yourself believing certain things to be true and remembering certain things to be true that are not true. The same is true when we're talking about like Dunning-Kruger Effect and the way that our perception of information can very much so affect our memory, affect our perception, and as such, it becomes another delusion. It creates a false idea, a false truth, and we believe in it. I know people who are living, breathing engines of Dunning-Kruger Effect. They go to work at jobs and they think they're going to do amazing at them, and they don't, and they get fired, and they think that it's the other people's fault. I know one guy in particular who comes to mind with this, and I had to fight him for years because he thought he was a great salesman. And I would routinely tell him I would never, ever buy anything from you. I was like, look, if you came up to me at the store, he would try to sell me things too. We would just be hanging out and he'd be like, whatever he was selling these days. would be the thing that he would try to like talk me into buying, and I would just look at him and be like, I'm not buying your thing. I'm not buying your new insurance. I'm not buying your new internet company. I'm not buying your new thing. Well, why not? It's a great deal. Because it's you selling it to me. And I don't like you.
Good point.
It was just like the way that he would approach things would be so. I mean, you think of like your traditional bad salesman, pushy, not listening to you, demanding, trying to trick you into buying it, trying to lie to you to get you to buy it. All of those things were pertinent for this guy, and he was bad at it. It was just like he was literally awful at this. It wasn't sneaky, it wasn't hidden. It was like having a barbarian trying to trick you into like buying their internet company. We have a really good deal. I don't have money, but we have such a good deal. You should buy it. I don't want to, but you should buy it. And he thought he was great. He thought he was a great people person. He thought he was a great salesman. He thought he was just magnificent in his interactions with human beings. Everybody hated him, but he thought these things.
Wow. Like a delusional.
Exactly. That's why we're talking about him.
Yeah.
Because this is a prime example of like how delusional we can become when we're not open to being challenged in the realm of our, the way that Dunning-Kruger Effect gets like counteracted is by allowing yourself to be open to new information, by allowing yourself to be open to learning from experiences. And this is why it's a teachable thing, why it's a discussion worthy of a Bible study, is because it does hamper our relationships with God.
Like we might think that we know better than God.
There are tons of people who would put God into question, who would say that they are more I know one person right off the top of my head who would claim that they are more compassionate than God. They're judgmental as hell. Like they're brutal in their judgments for other people, especially and themselves. Yeah, but they look at stories from the Bible and they grab specific ones and are like, well, I'm better than that. And it's like, do you know the context for that or the background behind that? No. Okay, then you're probably not. Then you're probably not in a place to make that judgment call. But it's more than that. Because one of the big things is, as we were talking about in the beginning, about how Dunning-Kruger effect, especially when it's allowed to like continue and persist, or when it's maintained. Because one of the big things is like, talking about how prevalent it is these days, how commonplace it is to see people who think so highly of themselves, who believe so highly in their abilities, even though they have no evidence to back any of that up, even if they have every experience proving them to be wrong about their capabilities. A lot of people don't listen. They don't learn from their experiences. It's like back when I was younger, I remember being told that there were kind of two mentalities, two ways that people learned. You have the people who they can't be told that the fire is hot. They have to touch it and learn that way. The stovetop is hot. Don't touch it. They touch it. They now understand it's hot and it will burn you. Then you had other people who could absolutely be told, and they would learn from that. And then you had the people who would watch the other people get burned and learn from that. But it was always kind of a baseless idiom when I was younger. Like in retrospect, learning styles are a lot more dynamic than that, of course. but it was a little like baseline thing that people threw around. Whereas nowadays, a lot of people's mentality is if I've learned this information from a source that I trust or I believe in, I will fight and maintain this. And if anybody questions me, I will remove them from existence. Because one of the things that we run into is that with the advent of the internet, and especially things like Facebook, Twitter, and so on, you will never, ever, ever run the risk of never having anybody tell you you're wrong. You will absolutely always be able to put out ideas into the ether and have somebody pop off on how wrong you are.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah, but where you get it?
I got it from the.
Where are you going?
Oh,
You sit down?
I thought there was gonna be places, but.
Okay. Sit down.
But yeah,
Appreciate it, man.
what was I talking about?
You were talking about how
Facebook or a ton everybody
there's,
Oh.
yeah, with the advent of the internet, there's no way that you can ever
You get something
put something
juicy.
out there and not have it
Right,
challenged.
you will always
have
have,
somebody tell you that you're wrong.
yeah, you'll always have people open to telling you that you're wrong.
Yeah.
But the difference is that a lot of
Are
them,
you open to hearing it?
are you open to hearing it, or do you just block them on grounds that they're trolls? And that's where we get into like a lot of an issue, because there are people out there who believe it's their calling from on high is to just go around and crap on everybody. So they might not know anything about the subject, but they'll tell you that you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What's funny is like even if you say you're wrong or right, you can't like do anything about it. You know,
Right.
it's just an argument. It's like,
Yeah.
you can't change it.
Right. And that's the thing is like, within that though, then you also have the people who are literally trying to like question what you're putting out there or challenge your beliefs because maybe there's something off about them. And it's not always easy to determine between the two. The great drawback of any kind of online communication is you remove a lot of the tone and body language and a lot of the other ways that we communicate. So you don't really know what people are angling at, if they're trying to just stir you up and piss you off, or if they're literally trying to help.
Yeah.
So as a result, or if it's a discussion where you have more information than they do, and they're the ignorant one in this case, there has to be a way to like hash that out. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't have the patience for that online. The moment that you like say something, they're just going to be like, oh, you're disagreeing with me. Blocked. Blocked.
That's kind of better.
It's not better. It's
Oh.
bad.
Yeah,
It's bad.
you're right.
So this is kind of like the situation, and as a result of that kind of atmosphere, that kind of stigma being something that exists, you don't have a lot of people's viewpoints or perspectives being tested or challenged. Somebody's free to run around and say like, oh, I'm a great worker and it's everyone else's fault that I got fired, rather than it being having their coworkers pipe up and be like, actually, you're a terrible worker. We had to cover for you constantly. You were always late. You neglected your shifts. You treated the customers like garbage. So they're just allowed to maintain their own narrative.
Why? Don't we have to get the card in my purse?
So this is kind of like the paradigm that we find ourselves with. And it's why the Dunning-Kruger Effect is something that you can find so consistently in play with people. It's very prevalent, and it's very much granted every opportunity to exist and expound and to grow into full-fledged delusions.
Oh, here's the air. They say you should sit right here.
So the thing that we
Farthest away from the air.
the things that we end up finding ourselves with then are that, whatchamacallit?
Crazy 8.
We don't see a lot of opportunities where people are being challenged and growing in their own ways. Instead, they just kind of huddle down into stagnant little pools of ignorance and live there. And that's where they stay. And as a result, there's a lot of false information out there. It's where you get people like believing that the earth is flat and things like that. What's more is through the internet, they can find the other people who believe the same kind of things, and they can kind of compound their delusions and build something and build up a movement, which is horrifying.
Just 3 more Fridays and then she's leaving.
And this is the thing that we find ourselves looking at, is when it comes down to the church and it comes down to God, we obviously need that openness, that ability to be challenged, and it's scriptural. Like a lot of Christians, and I remember this was my big struggle with coming into the church, was that, you know, my entire like high school, early 20s was spent in college, like involving myself more with the scientific community and like debate, for example. The point behind debate in the scientific community is arriving at facts. You bring your information, the person you're against brings their information, the two of you talk, you bring your information, and whoever has the best information is the one that's right. And as a result, you kind of move towards this goal of building something up. What I learned the hard way, getting involved with the church, was that is not the mentality that people have. They're not looking for learning together. Most people are looking to be right about their interpretation of who God is. So you could bring all the information in the world, you can bring all the scriptures, you could have Jesus himself walk down with you to tell them they're wrong, and they'll still fight you about it because they want to be right. So this is where we find ourselves with this particular struggle, and where the Dunning-Kruger effect kind of comes into play is you have a lot of people who have ideas of who they are generated out of places of either ignorance or incompetence. I'm a great minister, some might say, when in reality they drive people away from the church on a routine basis. I can't tell you how many people I've met who claimed to be great leaders in the church. Nobody listened to them. Nobody respected them. Nobody was interested in what they had to offer, but they would yell about very loudly about how they were a leader. So it became a problem. And that's the thing that we run into, is that we find this a lot just in the church and in the world at large.
Yes. And our hearts.
And in terms of like I mentioned, it was scriptural to be challenged, to have conversations about these things. Like a couple of verses that I was sitting on. One is Proverbs 27:17, and that is the more typical, the well-known verse. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. But the other one, and maybe a little longer, is Proverbs 9, which goes, "Wisdom has built her house. She has set up its 7 pillars. She has prepared her meat and mixed her wine. She has also set her table." She has sent out her servants, and she calls from the highest point of the city, "Let all who are simple come to my house." To those who have no sense, she says, "Come eat my food, and drink the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways, and you will live. Live in the way of insight.
She wants clubs again.
Whoever corrects a mocker invites insults. Whoever rebukes the wicked incurs abuse. Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning.
And we're playing here now.
Why you can't play? I thought we were playing Crazy Eights. We are wild and crazy.
That one was where again?
That's in Proverbs 9, 1 through 9.
Okay.
You didn't have to.
Oh, dang, Mom.
See, the thing about it is even in these Proverbs, the message is effectively, look to be challenged. The wise aim to be corrected because they want to know truth. It's those who mock and are ignorant who are looking to insult and fight. And the thing that we run into is that upon reading the study by Dunning-Kruger, the ways that they presented forth as far as how to counteract their own effect, like their own study,
Sit here for a minute.
were to be open to correction, to be open to expanding your information, learning from experience, being open to being wrong.
You're my favorite.
These were simple things that were put forth by the two doctors involved in the study to help people overcome this particular problem so they wouldn't have to live with it. They wouldn't have to carry that forward.
Can't say anybody's name.
It's one of those instances of, something that's in Scripture being brought forth and highlighted by psychology.
Why are these all sticky?
Because in the end,
This is chocolate.
like,
Smell it.
It smells like coconut.
if these things are left to grow and manifest, all that they do is lead us to places of maintaining ignorance, maintaining incompetence. We don't grow. We just stay the same, and we stagnate in delusions. And we might think that we have grandeur,
Do you have a card to play? Or do you want Bert?
but the cold reality is that we don't.
A heart.
Oh.
I ate so wild,
And this can very much so affect our relationship with God, our relationships with each other,
Don't touch my car.
because oftentimes in order to maintain those kinds of delusions, we have to remove a lot of the outside world, and we have to further isolate ourselves more and more and more in order to continue to see ourselves in this particular way. So
You have made it. Oh.
it's something that we have to be open to seeing
Diamonds.
challenged, something that we have to be open to having corrected.
Clubs again.
Oh, clubs.
And that's what I've got.